Welcome, and thank you for joining us for another webinar hosted by the IU School of Medicine Alumni Association. My name is Mark Notestine. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Development and Alumni Relations at the Indiana University School of Medicine. Today's webinar is part of our series highlighting the talented IU School of Medicine faculty members who are leaders in their respective areas. It's my privilege to showcase these individuals to our alumni across the country and the many faculty members here at the IU School of Medicine joining us here today. Please mark your calendars for the next webinar featuring our new Chair of Cardiology, Dr. Subha Raman, on December 9th at noon Eastern Standard Time. So, Indiana University School of Medicine is a world leader in the research of Alzheimer's disease, and one of the key reasons for that is our speaker today, Dr. Bruce Lamb. Dr. Lamb is an internationally recognized expert who focuses on genetic drivers of Alzheimer's disease. His work in developing mouse models that can mimic late-onset Alzheimer's in humans has been crucial to researchers who are exploring potential therapies for the disease. Last year, Dr. Lamb was appointed to co-lead an IU School of Medicine effort that is investigating potential Alzheimer's drugs that have been identified by pharmaceutical companies, academic and nonprofit groups, but will need significant help from academia to become a reality. Dr. Lamb has received numerous awards for his work. He is the Roberts Family Chair in Alzheimer's Disease Research and Executive Director of the Stark Neurosciences Research Institute. Please welcome Dr. Bruce Lamb.
Thank you so much for attending the webinar today, and I'd really like to tell you about how IU School of Medicine, as Mark just mentioned, is really leading efforts on Alzheimer's disease research really across the country and across the world through really an entire spectrum of translational research at the school. What I wanted to do was first start and tell you a little bit about the Stark Neurosciences Research Institute, which is the institute that I currently direct at IU School of Medicine, and then go in more specifically into the Alzheimer's programs, and finally end by telling you about some new initiatives together with a partnership with Indiana University Health. So Stark Neurosciences Research Institute, this is the mission statement, which is really to obviously advance discovery of neuroscience-related disorders, disease management, and then advance these with therapeutic development to help patients and their caregivers. So this is obviously a fairly broad mission statement, and in addition, the areas of research that are focused on at the Stark Neurosciences Research Institute are quite broad. We have a very strong program in neurodegeneration, which includes Alzheimer's disease, as I'll be talking about, but also Parkinson's disease and other related dementias. We have a very strong program in addiction, and historically has been one of the strongest programs at IU School of Medicine, both in alcohol, but also in other opioids and other drugs. We have a program in pain. We also have a program in neuropsychiatric disorders, as well as a really significant program in neurotrauma. And so these are sort of the large buckets of areas of neuroscience that IU is certainly developing and leading. But what I really wanted to do today was to talk to you about Alzheimer's disease. So first I wanted to just give you sort of a high-level picture of Alzheimer's disease and where we're at, both as a community and as a country. And unfortunately, Alzheimer's disease is becoming increasingly common, largely due to changing demographics within both our communities and nationally. So these are some facts and figures that are derived from the Alzheimer's Association in a report that they generate every year. Currently, Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. Approximately 5.8 million people currently living with the disease, but this is projected to increase quite a bit over the next decades And that's, again, largely because of the changing demographics. So, for example, there are 10,000 people in the United States every day who are reaching the age of 65 in this baby boomer demographic. And those are the people who are at highest risk to then go on and develop the disease. And then finally, I think, and most significantly, this has a major impact, not obviously just on the patients and their families, but also the financial costs, both to our communities and to the federal budget as well. And so this year alone was $290 billion dedicated to Alzheimer's care within the United States. And this obviously also has an impact in Indiana, and these are the same numbers from the Alzheimer's Association, but really now focused on Indiana. Again, a large number of people currently living with disease, and is one of the leading causes of death within the state, and again, at a big expense within the state as well. So this is really why, again, we need to address this and tackle this disease and come up with solutions to both improve patients' lives, hopefully prevent disease altogether, and obviously also support the caregivers who are really at the forefront of this disorder. Unfortunately, right now there are 4 FDA-approved drugs for Alzheimer's disease, but all 4 really largely treat the symptoms and do not get at what we call are not disease modifying. So do not get at the underlying disease biology. They just treat the symptoms of the disease. So while they do indeed work, they generally work for a very limited amount of time and at a very distinct stage of disease as well. There's a lot of work that's been going on in trying to advance more therapies into Alzheimer's disease. And again, unfortunately, these have not yet led to a therapy that's been approved by the FDA. So just to go through this a little bit, there are 2 primary areas where the Alzheimer's disease drug discovery efforts have been focused on. And it's these 2 proteins that are found in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. So the first is beta amyloid, or we also call it A-beta, which is a small peptide that aggregates within the brain. And there are a number of therapeutic trials that have been used to target this protein by either removing it from the brain or to prevent it from aggregating in the first place. And again, largely those have failed, although I will say that there is a drug by Biogen, which is currently before the FDA and will be examined in, I think, November 6th, will be assessed in terms of the FDA, and whether this will get ultimately approved will remain to be seen. In addition, there are therapies that have been really directed towards tau, which is the other major protein that also aggregates within the brain of Alzheimer's disease patients. And again, there are a variety of different strategies to either remove or prevent tau from developing within the brain. Again, unfortunately, there was just a clinical trial 2 weeks ago that read out where there was really no benefit to patients within that clinical trial. So I think we have not done very well sort of at getting therapies to patients and making a clinical impact. And so I think there's a large effort nationwide and internationally to sort of relook at how do we reinvigorate this drug pipeline to bring new therapies forward to this critically unmet need right now. And I would sort of say IU School of Medicine really has emerged just very recently as an important leader in Alzheimer's disease research internationally, nationally, as well as locally. And since we're all virtual here and you can't unfortunately come down to the Neuroscience Center and see for yourself how things are going, I now have a sort of a brief video that we developed a couple of years ago with the help from Jay Hess and the Dean's office that just highlights both the building that we work in and the collaborative efforts to develop the Alzheimer's disease program.
We've identified neurosciences as one of the highest priorities for the IU School of Medicine. We have built a state-of-the-art facility that provides a home for the 4 neuroscience-related clinical departments, and it's adjoined to a very modern research laboratory space, and it was built that way to enhance collaborations.
What really drew me to come to Indiana University was the collaborative opportunities that were obviously very advanced in this institution.
We really are set apart with respect to research, and it's because of the collaborative nature of the research programs here.
We have groups from multiple different departments working together, a group working on traumatic brain injury and spinal cord injury, again, across multiple different departments. We have a group on the second floor working on neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease, and the research space is just incredibly well designed. There's animals housed, research animals housed on every floor through the middle of the building, as well as an attached set of rooms where behavior or other surgeries or other types of work can be done, which is just a tremendous boon for neuroscience research.
Within the Alzheimer's Center, we have a tremendous range of expertise. We have basic scientists doing leading edge work at the cellular molecular level, working with cell cultures, working with animal models. On the clinical side, we have a range of clinical trials helping to push the envelope in terms of pharmacologic and lifestyle interventional approaches. In between, we have a range of studies and teams working on biomarkers, genetic assessments, and imaging using structural, functional, and molecular brain imaging with many advanced techniques. And then to take all of this data and make sense of it, we need experts in bioinformatics, in computer science, and engineering. We have all of those disciplines together in the same environment. There are a number of discoveries that have come from the Indiana Alzheimer's Disease Center over the past 26 years, where the early discoveries were based in neuropathology and focused on analysis of hereditary dementias. The focus has shifted somewhat to looking at the sporadic Alzheimer's disease that has a later onset and that constitutes probably 95% of the disease. Now we're using imaging tools to be able to detect the disease decades before a person actually develops dementia.
We've developed the new Model AD Center here at Indiana University, which is to develop new animal models for Alzheimer's disease. This is a large multi-institutional project involving Indiana University, Jackson Labs in Bar Harbor, as well as Sage Bionetworks in Seattle. And the idea is really to develop the next generation of animal models that will then accelerate the process by which we can bring therapies to patients.
Something very important to us in the Indiana Alzheimer's Disease Center is training the next generation of scientists who will continue work in neurodegenerative disease.
I think what sets Indiana University apart is the wealth of clinical as well as research knowledge and capabilities that people and researchers here possess, and also the extraordinary research funding, which is growing by the minute, expanding the opportunities for researchers like me that want to help diagnose early and cure this disorder.
So based on all the investments and recruitments of just some of the leading experts in Alzheimer's disease to IU School of Medicine, over the last several years, we have now developed an institute which again rivals some of the top institutions in the country in terms of the Alzheimer's disease research. So this slide just shows that currently, and this was in FY 2019, we're sort of fifth in the country in terms of funding from the National Institute on Aging, which is where the lion's share of Alzheimer's disease research is funded through. Actually, I was just looking this morning, and we're going to be probably over 62 million now in FY 2020, and we're not sort of yet done with the amount of grants that are sort of coming into the institution this year. And this has been a really transformative process. So this just shows the funding just over the last 4 years. And so you can get an idea of, again, just how we have transformed sort of this, the IU School of Medicine really into a center which has multiple large programs funding Alzheimer's disease research. So what I wanted to do now is just step through a little bit sort of our strategy for developing this research program. Obviously, we wanted to have a strategy to really maximize the potential investments that we have, both from the school and the health system, but also, of course, from the National Institutes of Health. So what we really have focused on is trying to develop a research program which spans all different aspects of research. So this slide shows a typical slide in terms of indicating the different phases of research that are required to first understand basic biology, develop disease therapies, and then move those into patients and into communities. And you can imagine this is a process that involves lots of people across many different disciplines. all sort of working together. And really, over the past several years, we now have expertise in basically all of these areas in Alzheimer's disease research, which again are very large programs. So for example, in the Stark Neurosciences Research Institute where I am, we have basic biology. We have another program called Model AD, which is Animal Model Center that I'll tell you about in just a minute. We now have a drug discovery center that I help co-lead called Treat AD, which again is also now at IU School of Medicine. In the video you saw Andy Sakin, who leads the Indiana Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which is one of many centers funded in the country. You also saw Dr. Liana Pastelova, who leads a study of early onset Alzheimer's disease called LEADS. And then finally, IU is also home to a biorepository for all of the samples coming across the country, come to Indiana from all the Alzheimer's centers, and that's called NICRAD. So we have just leading people from all around the country. IU has really targeted investments in individuals and really recruited these people, including myself, to IU School of Medicine. And this is what has really, I think, transformed our abilities to compete for these research programs and again build these programs. And this just shows only a subset of all the people that are part of this program, but again indicating the breadth of expertise we have across all of these different areas that are required again to develop therapies that are ultimately going to be brought to patients. So what I'm going to do now is just step through a little bit some of these big programs just to give you an idea of what they're like. Unfortunately, I don't have time to sort of really go into big depth into any of these, as they should be, but I thought just to give you a flavor of what we're doing. So the first is the Indiana Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which has been funded now for over 25 years. This just shows the goals. So this is one of over 30 NIH-sponsored centers that are shown on the map there on the right of all the other centers across the country. There's not that many, most of them are on the coast, but there's a few of us that sort of exist in the Midwest. This is led by Andy Sakin, who again was shown in that video. And the focus is really to develop infrastructure and capacity to see patients and to do research basically in Alzheimer's disease. So this is a major center which helps focus our efforts. One of the second one that I wanted to just briefly touch on is the longitudinal early onset Alzheimer's disease study, or LEADS. This is a study, one of a kind in the country, sponsored by NIH, which is led by Liana Pastelova, who is also in the video. And this really targets an unusual group of patients who have very early age of onsets for Alzheimer's disease, typically in the 50s and 60s. And this is to try to understand these patients. So to do a longitudinal study, examine their genetics and biomarkers, and try to really understand what is going on with those patients and how that relates to the more typical late onset Alzheimer's disease. One of the other major focus is this National Centralized Repository for Alzheimer's Disease and Related Dementia. It's also known as NICRAD. And as its name suggests, this is a biorepository which is headquartered at IU School of Medicine for all of the samples nationwide through these Alzheimer's disease research centers. This is led by Tatiana Faroud, who is the chair of medical molecular genetics and recently is also now the executive associate dean for research for the IU School of Medicine. And she leads this NICRAD where, again, samples including blood, including the genetic information, cells, all comes to IU School of Medicine from all the Alzheimer's centers from around the country. So this is really a unique opportunity really to take advantage of that strength here at IU School of Medicine. The next big program is the ones that I help lead, which is called Model Organism Development and Evaluation for Late Onset Alzheimer's Disease, or Model AD. This is again one of two funded NIH centers in the country that are within this Model AD consortia. One is combined with IU School of Medicine, the Jackson Laboratories, and University of Pittsburgh. And the goal of these programs is to develop new models for Alzheimer's disease, which will hopefully help us bring therapies to patients. So to try to build more predictive models for Alzheimer's disease, and then actually as part of the grant, actually go ahead and then start testing therapies we can hopefully move forward into patients. And the last major program, which was funded initially about 1 year ago, almost exactly, is the Target Enablement to Advance Therapeutics for Alzheimer's Disease, or TREAT-AD. This is, again, another NIH-funded initiative. So the TREAT-AD Center at IU School of Medicine is together with Purdue University. It's a great partnership between IU School of Medicine and Purdue. And we are one of 2, again, funded centers nationwide to develop these drug development pipelines. It's led by Alan Palkowitz, who's shown on the right of this slide, who is a former Lilly employee who led drug discovery efforts there. He and I co-lead this new drug discovery center. And we're just beginning to get our first results from this drug discovery pipeline, which has been really exciting, and we have a really talented group working on this. And the goals, again, are as fast as we can to try to advance new therapies and new therapeutic directions ultimately into patients. So in terms of thinking about this, to sort of see how this sort of all fits in terms of some of NIH-funded initiatives, NIH has funded in one program called AMP-AD, which is an Accelerating Medicines Partnership for Alzheimer's disease, which is to identify potential new targets for therapeutic development. And then we have at IU School of Medicine a center focused on TREAT-AD and then on Model AD. And the idea is with these TREAT-AD and Model AD is then to take those new potential targets that have come out of the AMP-AD project, to examine them in much more greater detail, to move some forward into then drug discovery, and then ultimately then test those in models that are part of Model AD. And I think you can begin to sort of see how all of these different pieces begin to start to piece together that IU School of Medicine is leading. And then in addition, we certainly are working with a lot of different public and private partnerships across the region and also nationally. We have partnerships with the Alzheimer's Association, and they're a critical partner both locally with the Indiana chapter as well as nationally. They have a major research program, including a $1 million gift from the Indiana chapter, which is the largest gift they've ever given to the LEAD study, which was done last year. We also have partnerships with Purdue, including this new TREAT-AD center that I mentioned. So this is really interesting partnership. We're currently in discussions with both Lilly and Roche, who have headquarters here in Indianapolis. So we are in discussions with them about additional partnerships, and some have already been developed. Obviously, NIH is a major partner of ours, and we are working very closely together with the leadership at NIH in these research programs. And then even we have some interactions with the Department of Defense, including an Alzheimer's research program that is funded through the Department of Defense. And these are really critical, and I would like to sort of say that the Alzheimer's disease research, really we need involvement of all of these different partners to ultimately really be successful and move this forward as fast as we can and move therapies forward into patients. Finally, I'm just going to touch on this because I think it's important for this group to know. Very recently, which was just within the past 6 months or so, it's been announced that IU Health, together with IU School of Medicine, is developing some clinical institutes. And one of these is focused on neuroscience. And this is really an effort to combine all of our efforts across all the different clinical entities to focus our efforts on neuroscience. And this will be co-led by Larry Gutman, who's on the left of this slide, who's the new chair of neurology as of 5 days ago or 6 days ago. Shelley Timmons, who is the chair of current chair of neurosurgery, and she arrived about 1 year ago. And then myself. And the idea is to really promote neuroscience across all 3 missions, clinical, research, and education, to really power ourselves and to advance therapies into patients and also have an impact statewide through both the school and the health system. Let's see if I can add. So I think at that point I'm pretty much going to finish up, and I think hopefully we still have some time for questions and conversation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lamb. Just a fantastic talk, and I think I can probably speak on behalf of all the participants in saying how impressed I am by the leadership you've provided, but also the leadership role that the IU School of Medicine is taking in combating this disease nationally and internationally. We had a large group of clinicians, alumni, faculty members, friends participating in today's call. The questions have started to come in. If it's okay, I'd like to go ahead and provide you with some of the questions that have been asked.
Yeah, that would be great. I'd love to do it. And one thing I'd just like to comment on in terms of what you sort of said, I mean, certainly I think me coming was part of, helping to do this, but it really is, again, about this group of people, who all are fairly new, really to the institution and again, the leadership at the school level, to really see the vision, for building this program by bringing in the right people who can all work together on this. And that, in my estimation, is really why this has paid off the way it has.
Sure, thanks. In meeting with Dr. Gutman and meeting with Shelley Timmons, your co-leaders in the Neuroscience Institute, it's a real testament to the caliber of people that Jay Hess in the dean's role has been able to attract to IU and to the School of Medicine. And in a little bit, I also want to get back to that issue of some of the partnerships in terms of industry. But
sure.
The first question that came in said, in your opinion, or what is your opinion, rather, on the effectiveness of using mouse models when evaluating drugs for research in Alzheimer's disease?
This is a great question, and one obviously we think very deeply about, and the role that I have as part of Model AD. I can tell you, so far, with most all the drugs that have come into clinical trials thus far, and have not worked out, have first been tested in mouse models. And so that's one of the sort of tests that typically is done before moving these into humans. And obviously, the fact that these haven't worked brings up the question, well, why haven't they worked? Is it, that the drug's not right? Is it that how it's delivered is not right? And one idea is maybe the animal models are not the right ones, for really looking at whether this is going to translate to patients. And so that's something really that Model AD, that's where Model AD first arrived out of, was NIH's realization that we needed better and more translatable models, that the models that we had were insufficient. The early animal models were based on really rare genetic forms of Alzheimer's disease that occurs in the 30s and 40s. These are very rare in families. Thankfully, they're very rare. And these models are very aggressive, so they develop really robust pathology. And so they've been a great model for just testing biology and understanding the disease process, but they don't sort of reflect the more typical late-onset Alzheimer's disease, which is far more complex, is much more complicated in terms of genetic factors. So what Model AD has been focused on is developing models for that late-onset disease as opposed to this very early and aggressive onset disease. And so I think time will tell. One of the things I would say is I don't think there's any one strategy, is it just working with animal models that is going to get us there? I would argue probably not. We probably need multiple different models. So there's large efforts underway at IU School of Medicine in what's called these induced pluripotent stem cells. So these are taking cells from patients and actually then rederiving a variety of brain cells in the dish that we can then study in vitro and test compounds. So this is another big model system, which again we are using in parallel with the animal model. So I think we're going to have multiple models all coming at this together.
Thank you. I think that's a great response. One of the things that I've learned about the IU School of Medicine during my tenure here is it's a passionate group of people who care deeply about the medical school and the work that's going on here. And by the fact that the question board is lighting up, I think that shows just how interested our alumni and our friends are about the work that's being done here. One of the questions said, please comment on if or when phosphorated tau 217 will be available and used as a biomarker. Mm-hmm. For our lay audience, please explain what phosphorated tau 217 is.
Okay, that's a great question, and obviously somebody who's been keeping up with the with the field. One of the big goals of the entire Alzheimer's research community has been to identify blood-based biomarkers, because right now the way Alzheimer's disease is usually defined is through a brain scan or from cerebral spinal fluid, which again are both fairly complex procedures, often very expensive, so not great for then doing on a community-wide basis. And so that's been one of the holy grails for the field is, can we get a blood-based biomarker? And I think for a lot of us, and I would put myself in that camp, we all thought this was going to be decades away, that it's really going to be hard. But really over the past 2 years, there's been a number of groups, including some with partnerships from the Ivy School of Medicine, who have started identifying specific things that can be detected in blood which seem to link with disease. And so phosphorylated, it should be phosphorylated, tau 217 is a particular form of tau, which I mentioned is one of the 2 proteins that aggregates in Alzheimer's disease. And so it has unique phosphorylation, which means a unique modification on that protein, which is disease specific, and it has now been detected fairly reliably in people with disease as compared to controls. And so it looks like it's a pretty good blood-based biomarker from the initial work. And again, some of this work was just presented this last summer at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, was where it sort of, I think, really hit the press this last July. And I would sort of say it's still at fairly early stages, because again, this has to be validated, it has to be reproduced by multiple labs, we have to develop a commercial aspect for this, and then get it out to the community and to providers. And so I think that's going to take some time, but I think within the next couple of years, we will likely see this start to come into clinical practice, would be my estimation at this point. So I think it's a really exciting development, and can completely transform, I think, how we do everything from designing clinical trials, for example. If we could identify people who were at an early stage of disease by doing a blood-based study, that would just transform sort of what we could do.
It's fantastic news, and in a world where discoveries sometimes take a lot of time, that really seems to be fairly accelerated progress.
Yeah, it was one of the most exciting developments, I think, for some time in the Alzheimer's research field. Again, given that clinical trials haven't worked, I think we need the good news to sort of keep us sort of saying, yes, we are really making progress. And so this is just taken off. There are some other blood-based biomarkers as well, other epitopes as well as beta amyloid actually can be tested in blood now. So that's a whole widely expanding field.
Now, earlier, I had made reference to the fact with one of your slides you were talking about private partnerships, and they range from giants like Lilly and Pfizer to national organizations, governmental organizations. One of the questions that was asked said, as you mentioned, the IU School of Medicine is taking on Alzheimer drug development. What is the role that you see for academia that is unique compared maybe to life science or pharmaceutical companies?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we think a lot about. And there's been a real change from the company's perspective on Alzheimer's disease research. I think because of some of the failures that have occurred in the clinical trials, a lot of the big pharma, and this would include Lilly, Biogen, a lot of the big ones, have done a lot of internal research and development, so within the company. They have a big R&D team, they're doing lots of research. And I think with these failures, I think what's happening across the board as these companies are becoming more externally focused, I think trying to identify potential new opportunities through partnerships with academia or other organizations, biotech, et cetera, for then further development. So it's more going externally and developing those partnerships and then moving those forward. And that's where I think we really have a unique opportunity at IU School of Medicine because of, again, what I was talking about, development of all of these different elements. We can do almost any aspect of the drug discovery pipeline, from basic biology to getting these into patients and everything in between. And so I think there's a real opportunity for then those partnerships to develop. We already have some interactions with Lilly. They help fund some fellowships, for example, in neurodegeneration, which they kindly gave basically the day I arrived to the school. We're in current negotiations about other developments. The Roche Diagnostics is here in town. They're one of the companies that actually is developing some of these blood-based biomarkers. So they are actually placing one of their most recent instruments actually into the Neurosciences Research Building, thanks to Liana Pastelova's work. And so that will be arriving any day to the neurosciences research building that we can then leverage for all of the neuroscience-related studies. So I think there's a lot of examples of that where and it's really helps accelerate the process through the development of those partnerships.
It's fantastic. The numbers are staggering when you looked at the research dollars that you showed recently. And I know at the medical school, research as a whole has grown very dramatically. Knowing you, Dr. Lamb, and having worked with you, I know that you've also gotten support from private philanthropy as well. Can you just talk a little bit about the role of philanthropy in your research?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's another really critical source of funds and opportunities. And it's something I've been very actively involved from even before I arrived at the school. It was one example. I hold the Roberts Chair in Alzheimer's disease research, which is kindly given by Dave and Susan Roberts. And so when I first arrived, I turned to the development team and sort of said, I want to meet with all of the donors, off the bat, And so we started having these meetings and then also regularly meet with them. It's not just, we have one conversation and then that's it. That I really think that it's about building relationships over time and showing that you are making progress in a specific area. And so Dave and Susan have been critically involved, but there's many other donors as well who have focused. Liana Pasilova's work has been supported by Ms. Bierkegaard, and there's others that again have really transformed what we can do. So the Roberts is a great example. We recently we're really trying to develop a translational research program, which went all the way from animal models, as I suggested, to humans. And one piece we were missing was we didn't have really good infrastructure to look at brain imaging. So that's a really major advance on human side, where we have just the latest tools in doing brain imaging, both MRI and PET. And so together with the Roberts, they were willing to give money, which helped us actually get a one-of-a-kind instrument, which is one of two in North America, from Bruker, which is a PET MR. It can do simultaneous PET and MR on animals. And this is just transformed. I've seen some of the images that are starting to come off of this instrument, and it is just totally astounding what this instrument can do, and it's completely, I think, going to revolutionize what kind of translational work we can do.
That's fantastic, and one of two in the country. It really is likely to be a game changer for you in your research.
No question.
Another question that came in, with so many clinical failures, is beta amyloid still a viable target for drug discovery and development?
Yep.
And maybe you could remind us, for the lay people in the group, myself included, of the role of the beta amyloid.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, there's these two proteins that aggregate within the brain. One is beta amyloid and the other tau. We talked a little bit about tau and that new tau epitope that can be detected in blood. But really, for the large part, beta amyloid has been the focus of clinical development over the last 2 decades or 3 decades. And again, not yet to new much success. And so I think that's really where that question comes at is, how long do you keep pursuing something before you say, okay, and I would sort of say that, so this drug I mentioned, it's called aducanumab, which is developed by Biogen, went through clinical trials, and there was clearly evidence that this protein could remove amyloid from the brain. So that was the first, I think, really clear demonstration that can be done. And there was some demonstration, although it was modest, that there could be some clinical benefit of removing that amyloid from the brain, which is obviously the more important thing. And so based on that data, they have moved forward and asked the FDA to approve their drug. And so that's what I mentioned is going to be done in November. The panel will be on November 6th. And I think there's a lot of questions in the field. Will it be approved? Will it not? The data, at least which has been published, externally in public, the data doesn't look terribly robust. It clearly removes amyloid, but the clinical data, I would say is not incredibly strong. But I think it does suggest that at least we can remove amyloid from the brain. And I think more and more, I think the thinking is for the field is moving that we need to have multiple therapeutic strategies likely that we're going to need to even potentially bring together. So it's not just targeting amyloid. We may need to target amyloid plus immune factors, and that's actually one of the big efforts of the drug discovery efforts underway at IU School of Medicine is focusing on immune targets, which are brand new. There's not a whole lot of data yet on developing and moving those forward. And I think, I don't think nobody is going to throw out beta amyloid altogether just because it's such a hallmark feature of the disease. Yes, it may not be the end all and be all for Alzheimer's therapies, but I think it's probably going to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful information. Kind of on a related note, one of our participants asked the question, how important is it to have people volunteer to take part in clinical trials, whether as patients already diagnosed with the disease and healthy people as control subjects?
Yeah, I can't stress that and how important that is. I mean, in terms of the progress in the field. And both people who are at different stages of disease. Most of the clinical trials now are focusing on early stage of disease because we realize now that the disease course is probably 2 to 3 decades. It's not that, you develop Alzheimer's disease overnight. It's that this is a prolonged process that occurs over decades. So that's sort of daunting at a certain level, right, to think that this process could be going on in all of us for many decades. But the flip side of that suggests that there might be windows that we can sort of intervene before, there's the major clinical signs. Maybe there's a way we can intervene. And so more and more of the clinical trials are targeting as early a stage as possibly can be done and still run the clinical trial. So I think that, I'm trying to remember what the question was that I was trying to get back around to. But I think that there are, certainly efforts now to try to move therapies, to as an early stage as possible. And I think, that definitely is where the field is moving forward. And the other part of the question actually was on controls. And I think that's the one that really, we don't have enough controls in most of the studies that are being done. And it is a critical need. There are so many different trials of different things that are going on. And it's a concern, I think, for the research community. How do we continue to build all these big research programs and clinical trials, if we can't continue to bring in more people into those clinical trials? And then the other, and this relates to a little bit to one of the other questions I see up there, is we also have to do much, much better at also recruiting patients from the diverse communities that we live in. And because, again, if you just look at, where are the clinical trials, and then you look at the demographics of those clinical trials, it is largely Caucasian. We do fairly well at sort of mix of gender, but the diversity has really been a problem. And it is something that, there's large efforts underway, both at the federal level and at the school level, to try to enhance. And again, there's some really fascinating data that's already started to develop out of some of those efforts that, for example, some of these blood-based biomarkers, we mentioned tau, look quite different, at least based on the preliminary data, in African Americans, for example, than in Caucasians. And so that suggests, this is something we really need to take a careful look at.
Yeah, I mean, certainly something right out of today's headlines when you talk about the different clinical trials with the vaccines for COVID-19 and the importance of having a diverse population. There was a question that had also come in from one of the viewers about the importance of diversity in faculty and across your team in terms of recruitment, retention.
Yeah, it's I think one of the good things I would say that came out of the COVID pandemic is I think sort of a reinforcement of how important it is that we think about not only the diversity in terms of healthcare outcomes, but also even just how we're bringing people into the communities for those different perspectives. And STEM fields are not great overall. And so this is something we've been having sort of lots of meetings. The dean has hired Pat Treadwell, who's sort of in the dean's office, who is going to be advising him on this. And I know she's developing a whole strategy to try to enhance that. And it's something I definitely worry about, especially given right now the research community is struggling, like we all are during COVID. And I think it's been most negatively impacting people who, are women, because again, they're often doing caregiving and other things at home. And so how do you maintain your career? And there's been some data to suggest that some women are even leaving their academic or STEM careers, just because of what's happening in their home life. I've heard some of the similar kinds of things in some of the diverse populations that this is a risky time for them. So we've had internal discussions about this. We actually just we're talking today with some of the other Big Ten schools, and we're trying to develop actually a Big Ten organization that's focused on neuroscience that's really going to try to promote diverse populations across the Big Ten that are moving into the field, trainees, assistant professors, and to try to highlight them and the work that they're doing. So I think it's effort like those. I mean, it is going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but we have to do it.
I think it's so important, and I was in a conversation with Dr. Treadwell earlier, and a proud IU alum. Mm-hmm. It's someone who has championed the cause for so many years and with such passion. One of the questions that came in, and I think we have time for a couple more questions. As a researcher working on such a daunting disease, are you hopeful that we'll see therapies in years or decades to come?
Yes, I mean, overall, I'm hopeful. Again, it has been a challenging time, I would say for the Alzheimer's research field, given some of the trials that have not worked, and when done doesn't work, it really impacts the field and the community. But on the flip side of that, I would say what we have learned over the past 2 decades or so about the disease, is astounding. Everything from these blood-based biomarkers, imaging. I mean, there are lots of things I didn't have time to talk about today, but all of these advances on understanding the disease that largely we didn't understand before. And so that's what gives me great hope. And then the second thing that gives me great hope is, again, I think things like are happening at IU School of Medicine, where we are bringing teams together across all areas of disciplines, and just bringing them together to really focus on this. And to me, that's really where I see really hope, that we need people. For example, the Drug Discovery Center, we have structural biologists, we have computational biologists, we have medicinal chemists, we have, and again, to bring all of these people together is really unusual, and that doesn't typically occur in academic settings. Most of us tend to sort of focus in our own group area of expertise, and we don't sort of move across these areas. And so that's another thing that gives me great hope. And then the final is, again, these partnerships, that if we can in academia partner with the Lillys or Roche of the world and really move things forward in a fast manner, I'm quite hopeful.
Yeah, it's great to hear your hopeful message, and it's a terrible disease, but there are so many brilliant people together, working together, right, toward those therapies in the future and in advanced treatments, that it's great to hear your message of hope. Yeah. The last question that we have time for today is from a viewer who said you mentioned caregivers. I have friends and relatives who have been diagnosed and struggled with Alzheimer's. What is being done to help improve the quality of life of patients and thus ease the work of caregivers? Yeah, there's a lot of research being done just on that alone. It's true. I mean, the impact on caregivers is just astounding. If you look at the data, caregivers are at higher risk for a whole variety of medical-related issues because, again, of the stress, of the anxiety, of everything that goes, lack of sleep, all the other things that sort of go along with that. So it's a really critical unmet need. I could tell you firsthand, my father-in-law has Alzheimer's disease, so I've seen this, in a very firsthand way. And so what I would sort of say is there's research being done at IU School of Medicine as well as in Bloomington on these very issues. So, how in communities, how do we better interact with caregivers and support them? For example, there's a study being done of social networks. We know that social interactions are really critical, and this is, again, a concern currently of the COVID era, that obviously people don't necessarily have those social interactions. But social interactions are known to be a key element of keeping people engaged and really helping to support the caregivers as well. And so they're doing research on what is the best way to support those, and doing studies actually to study that. There's other work being done on developing digital devices. So, example like Apple Watches or other types of things that can detect if somebody has problems with their gait and is at a risk to a fall, and all of the downstream things that would come with that. So there's a lot of research being done in that space.
to electronic notebooks. Can we develop electronic notebooks that will help caregivers? So there's a huge amount of work being done in that space, and it's a really critical area that I know NIH is really focused on too.
And it's such an important reminder of the value that a comprehensive research institute, like we have at the IU School of Medicine, provides in combating these types of diseases. We're coming at it from all different angles and are fortunate to have and continue to build teams of people who are really going to make a difference in this work going forward. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Bruce Lamb for presenting at our webinar today. Very interesting. I knew it would be. Lots of great questions, a large group of people participating. So on behalf of the IU School of Medicine and the Alumni Association, I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you and your team for your amazing work, and we look forward to celebrating future successes.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll come out of COVID and we can invite folks who are on the line now to come down and see firsthand, because I think seeing is believing, and so hopefully we can figure that out at some point.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure.